greetings. This is Until the Last Gasp's Extreme Metal Podcast, and my name is Fraser. Welcome back to those of you who listened to my first episode where I talked about the Dave Vincent era of Morbid Angel. If you are returning, I'm extremely grateful that you've lent me your ears again and that I haven't chased you off. And to those of you who haven't heard the first episode but are interested, please have a look at my links to my Facebook page, Spotify, Bandcamp, or the YouTube channel, or just search Until the Last Gasp Extreme Metal Podcast. That would be greatly appreciated. Now, today we're looking at a highly influential band from the extreme metal scene, which was going around in the early Swedish scene of the 90s, which fused melodic death metal with the prevalent sound that was going around at the time, death metal and black metal, to make the subgenre of black and death metal. And of course, through that, I'm talking about the most influential of that sound, the misanthropic Luciferians themselves, known as Dissection. The band was created in the autumn period of 1989 by a young John Nodvite, I'm not sure the pronunciation. As an Australian, I'm going to butcher a lot of these things when I start to see umlauts and dashes over the top of letters. I have no idea how to pronounce these, so do forgive a lot of these errors that I will definitely make in pronouncing these names. But John Nodvite was on guitar and vocal, and Peter Palmdale was on bass, and in 1990 they recruited Ollie Ullman on drums, and they recorded their first demo. And in October that year, they added the live guitarist Mattias Johansson and played their first live show in support of death metal legends Entombed. In December that year, they would also go on to record their demo, The Grief Prophecy, which was a legendary demo in the underground as well. In 1991, John Zweslute would replace Mattias, and they would play more live shows, and later that year they would record the EP Into Infinite Obscurity, another classic demo from that period. These are now compiled onto one album that you can purchase called The Past Is Alive, The Early Mischief. I do recommend picking that up. I won't be covering that one because it isn't a full-length album. It's more of a collection of demos, but it's a worthy purchase, and if you're a fan of Dissection, definitely add it to your collection. So in 1992, they would sign a one-album deal with No Fashion Records, and this is where we get to the first album in the Dissection discography known as the Somber Lane. The Somber Lane was recorded with the lineup of John Nodvite on vocals and lead guitar, John Zweslute on rhythm guitar, Ollie Ullman on drums, and Peter Palmdale on bass. Recorded at Uni Sound Studio by one of the most recognised names in death metal, Dan Swano. He's a fantastic musician in his own right too. He created Edge of Sanity, so do yourself a favour and check out the album Crimson by them. It's a masterpiece. He would also join members of Opeth to create the supergroup Bloodbath, so if you're not aware of that, he was also a guitarist in that and did the production on that as well, so definitely a legend in the Swedish metal scene. The album cover for this one was done by the now legendary artist Christian Necrolord Wahlen and was released in December of 1993 on the 3rd, with 11 songs, a total runtime of 45 minutes and 38 seconds. The track listing there is Black Horizons, The Somber Lane, Crimson Towers, A Land Forlorn, Heaven's Damnation, Frozen, Into Infinite Obscurity, In the Cold Winds of Nowhere, The Grief Prophecy, Shadows Over a Lost Kingdom, Mistress of Bleeding Sorrow, and Feathers Fell. Black Horizons. The intro to this song feels more reminiscent of what was coming out of the Norwegian scene at the time with bands like Mayhem and Burzum than the usual writing that comes to mind when you're discussing the Dissection sound. The time during their demos when they had contact with Euronymous and the bands in the Black Circle of Norway would most likely be where this had rubbed off on their sound, as John and Ollie had made a trip over to Norway the year prior to recording this and performed a song with Mayhem on stage, which would probably lend credibility to the assumption that that's where it would have come from. And it's only when you get around the 2nd minute mark that we're kind of thrust into the gallop of that signature Dissection riffing. But it's not too long after that too, you kind of get that real scope of what the sound of Dissection is too. It's got that dark melodic chorus with riffing somewhat akin to something you would describe as an Iron Maiden-esque sound, but definitely with a push tempo and distortion driven far further than anything you would ever expect to hear from the Iron Maiden camp. The midway point of this song, we get to another iconic part of the Dissection sound with an acoustic interlude that picks up with the kind of ambient halftime guitar riff with trading off melodic lead lines. You continue to evolve the riff as it suddenly drops back to that acoustic guitar line and builds with the drums, so that when it does hit with the next distorted riff, it has maximum effect of that epic feel. Also adding a high King Diamond-esque vocal to it was Dan Swano, followed up by a raspy growl of John Nodvite. And the riff after that, we have some clean male choir-style vocals that kind of help build that epicness still and retain the atmosphere. From there, we go back into the verse riff with John Nodvite doing rapid-fire rasping vocals, just cramming a ludicrous amount of syllables into that verse, which ends on one of those giant open chords. This is classic song for this period. You're pretty much treated to the smorgasbord of Dissection style in that, and it only gets better from there, people. The Somber Lane. The next notable song on this record, which follows straight after Black Horizons, is the title track, the Somber Lane, which starts off with, you guessed it, another melodic riff. This is almost a melancholic neoclassical style riff. It has that kind of feel to it with the accompanying lead guitar melody playing gently behind it. It's a very fitting sound for something called the Somber Lane, because that definitely sets up that melancholic feel perfectly. They transition from this into a nice mid-paced black metal riff for the verse, which tells of angels fall from heaven or some kind of philosophy of a Luciferian afterlife. But one thing that will continue to come up about this band is they're referring to how melodic they are, especially on this record, and the next riff is no exception. This record really plays off that yin-yang elements of beauty and aggression, but they balance it so well, and it never feels to tread into the realm of ridiculousness. It's really tasteful and maintains a dark and somber atmosphere, and the changes between them feel organic and not forced. For a band this young, you really got to commend that kind of purposeful songwriting that they have. And within the 5-minute mark of this song, we also have what could very well be the heaviest riff in the Dissection catalogue, nestled in one of its most melodic songs. It returns again to that jaunty build-up as the song finishes on its chorus, and this song is great early representation of the key elements of the Dissection sound. It's perfect. It's a perfect balancing act. Heaven's Damnation. Heaven's Damnation I'm going to bring up as a song of note, just because it's a song that best shows the inversion of elements that we've been hearing on this record. The melody and runs initially take a backseat to the more aggressive black metal sound on this one, and you only kind of have those elements pop back in for the hook of the chorus. And they're not around too long either. They just kind of have that, and then they dive headlong into that fast, trem-picked black metal sound again with some added thrash metal elements in there. Really helps add some effective changes, and the middle of this song moves into a somewhat Death Doom feel as well, which was a very popular sound in Sweden at the time with bands like Catatonia and that in the early 90s scene. But this is more of a toe dip rather than a diving in of that sound for them. And we get from there into what kind of has a pirate's jig sound of a melodic riff there, and doesn't stick around too long before we're back into our black metal stride to finish off this short but sweet song. The Grief Prophecy, Shadows Over a Lost Kingdom. This song starts out listing as a two-parter, but what we really have here is a combination of two tracks from their demo days, one being the intro from Severed Into Shreds from the first demo, which is now titled after the first demo, The Grief Prophecy, and Shadows Over a Lost Kingdom, of course, from the second demo. And this is put together, I would assume, mainly to just help the runtime, because even together it still comes out under 4 minutes, and that's not a knock, because these two added together make for a great song, and without hearing the demos, you wouldn't think they were one separate to begin with anyway. And the atmosphere building of The Grief Prophecy is short but sweet. These large distorted chords ring out while a melodic guitar lick moves in between them with the added drum beat, and that's where we kind of have that big jump off into the Shadows Over a Lost Kingdom. It has those same elements but with a more grander pomp And you can feel the building intensity here as it moves into this swaying headbanger of a riff with a bouncy melody coupled with a weighty stomp. We're only about a minute and a half into this song, and its evolving dynamics just keep moving quick and with huge amounts of atmosphere. We're followed by another guitar lick and a scream that cuts through to initiate the following black metal riffing. And from there we have that intersection with some Swedish mellow death, and the song finishes by returning to the first riff and flooring that tempo. We also get over the top of that some references to a prophecy from the sea, which I guess is talking about some necronomic deity like Dagon or Cthulhu, but of which I'm not really sure. And this one has a really abrupt finish on there, but fantastic song nonetheless. And what really floors me too about this record is that at the time of the release, John had only recently turned 18 years old. These guys had crafted an undeniable classic and helped define a new subgenre on their first outing, and this wasn't lacking in songwriting or creative brilliance. Like the atmospheres and, dare I say, there were some really elegant melodies and moments on this record. Their potential was only at its surface, it had its surface scratched at this point, and knowing what was to come and the events to follow is really disappointing when you start to consider what could have been for the careers of these guys and their musical output. But we'll get to that in due time. And now we have the pleasure of diving into what was, for its time, the jewel in the crown of the Swedish black metal or blackened death metal scene, Storm of the Lightsbane. And to say this album is influential is an understatement and a half. The reach of this album is still found today in bands like Watain and Thalkundra and countless others. The lineup for this record was John Nodvide on vocals, lead and rhythm guitars, also acoustic guitars. We had Johan Norman on rhythm guitars, Peter Palmdale on bass guitar, and Olli Oman on drums. We also had some guest musicians on here. We had Alexandra Ballot on piano, as well as Marduk's Legion, backing vocals for Thorns of Crimson Death, as well as Tony Sarka. Lots of umlauts on this one. I'm going to say Sarka of Abruptum, who did the backing vocals on Soul Reaper. One thing again they did do is they went to Unisound again to record with Dan Swano. He did the recording, engineering and mix on this. And we also have the return of Necrolord doing the album cover on this one. It was released on the 17th of November 1995. We had 8 tracks with a total runtime of 43 minutes and 16 seconds. The tracks were At the Fathomless Depths, Night's Blood, Unhallowed, Where Dead Angels Lie, Retribution, Storm of the Lightsbane, Thorns of Crimson Death, Soul Reaper, and No Dreams Breed in Breathless Sleep. Night's Blood. Night's Blood is one of Dissection's most popular songs. It thunders in at a mental pace. The riffing on this one is so fast the drums feel like they're being led instead of doing the leading, almost struggling to hold pace. But the energy on this one is immense and ferocious. Where the last album was full of dense, melancholic atmospheres, it kind of goes more for the throat on this one and doesn't relent. This time they've ratcheted up the difficulty and execution, and the production on this one with the guitars, it's a lot more sharp, or most likely to provide clarity in the speed of these performances. Lyrically, there are some impressive, dark, poetic, yet I can't articulate exactly what they're referencing in this song. If I was to guess, I'd say it's something like a vampiric tale of, I don't know, a soul's damnation or a command to drink the blood of the night and the loneliness of being a creature of the night, somewhere along those lines. But someone with more insight, please feel free to clarify this to me. I don't have any actual references to this. Just going off the talk of drinking blood as damnation's wine, so that's what my assumption's based on. The elements of this song are very similar to Black Horizons. They've just really dialed them up. The black metal riffs there and the midsection that pulls back into a somber passage, returning to a heavy riff, finishing on melodic guitar interplay. It's all here, but this time they've really perfected the arrangement. And there's no doubt that this song is a classic. Where Dead Angels Lie. This is the first single from the band, which also had their first music video, and you can find a CD-shaped single of this as well, which pops up online time to time for collectors out there, which is in the cutout of the inverted cross symbol that they were using at the time. There was a lot of faith in this album, and especially this song, to be a strong selling point, and it didn't disappoint in that. This is quite easily their most popular song. This is probably the closest Dissection also got to returning to the atmospheric darkness of their previous record, but even with this song's slower tempo, it still feels like there is an energy that really drives this forward. Those extreme melodic, but once again balancing acts of heavy and beauty and menace is perfectly at play here. The twin guitar harmonies in this song are extremely catchy, and the structure is so well written that 5 minutes just passes you by in an instant. The lyrics seem to tell the tale of an angel that's preyed upon by darkness, and it casts a spell over the land, darkening the skies, and seduces this being of light before luring it to its demise, and watching its body being overtaken by snow and ice. It's a really darkly poetic tale from a young John Nodvite, and it ain't all about devils and fire for these guys. Thorns of Crimson Death. When it comes to crowd pleasers, you don't usually have 8-minute big, bold epics come to mind, but in Dissection's case, you do. Thorns of Crimson Death. This song has it all. The intro is melodic as they come, and you almost feel as if some of this has got a folk swing driving it, which builds to the verse, treats you to a few bars without lyrics. So you can really appreciate its genius as you're calibrating your head banging. The sound on here, those riffs, they would make a monomath envious. And at this point, I've gone on about the Dissection songwriting and their sound and abilities, even more than I'm comfortable with repeating through. With all of these parts, they're here and accounted for, so I can't really say too much more about this song other than this is their battle anthem. I mean, this album is really only 6 songs, but it's bookended with an intro and an outro for runtime, but these are some of the best songs ever written in black metal, especially the Swedish scene. This album deserves all its accolades, its praise. It must have been something about a coming of age in Sweden back in the 90s, because all these metal bands were right into these dark conceptual musings of death, loss, and darkness and melancholy. They're churning out the masterpieces in this early scene, and this one almost stands head and shoulders above anything else. But it was truly a great hotbed of talent during this early period in 90s Swedish black metal and death metal. It was at the highest point in their young career that the personal life of the frontman would derail the band and leave its future uncertain. At this point, I want to express that I can't condone or glorify the events that took place in this next section of the podcast, nor do I want to diminish the impact of these events. All I'm trying to do is provide a recounting of these events as factually as I can. John, along with a few other friends, had joined a satanic group called the Misanthropic Luciferian Order, or MLO for short. This was a young sect of Satanists who would perform rituals and animal sacrifices, but it wasn't too long before they would try to increase the extreme nature of their actions. Talks about human sacrifice and mass suicide within the group drove away some of the members, and they, along with former members of the band, would find themselves as potential targets for the MLO's sinister plans. These ideas led to one of the most infamous murders in Swedish history. The investigation and following court case would find John Nodvite and a founding member of the MLO named Vlad guilty of murder. Details of the crime vary between different sources and accounts, but what we know is that on the 23rd of July 1997, the body of Joseph Ben Medor was found at Keeles Park in Gothenburg, Sweden. He had 2 gunshot wounds, one in the back and the other in the back of the head. It was believed that Medor had come across Vlad and John in a park where they had a conversation about Satanism or Luciferianism. And being enthusiastic about the topic, Medor wanted to learn more from the 2 men. The 2 of them led Medor back to John's house, but while on the journey it became apparent to them that Medor was a homosexual, which angered them and is believed to be the motive for their crime. Medor was too intimidated to enter John's home, but they agreed to take a walk back to the park, but not before John had gone into his house to retrieve a stun gun and a pistol from his house. Upon returning to the park, they tried to attack the man with a stun gun, but they were unsuccessful. Medua tried to flee but was shot in the back and then executed with a final shot to the head. Vlad's account of the events was that John was the one that had fired upon the man, whereas John's accounts had stated that Vlad was the sole shooter. Vlad's girlfriend had gone to the police after he assaulted her and informed them that he, Vlad, had confessed to her that he had fired the immobilizing shot to the back where John had delivered the fatal gunshot wound to the head. The court would find both of the men guilty of the crime, but John was convicted only of possessing an illegal firearm and being accomplice to murder, where Vlad was sentenced for the murder, the assault of his girlfriend, illegal possession of a firearm, and possession of human remains. Dissection was over, and the founding member was in prison. John was released from prison and reformed Dissection in 2004 with a new lineup. He said he believed the new lineup would stand up to the demands of Dissection's satanic concept. There were initially beliefs that the lineup would contain Bard Faust, the former drummer of Norwegian black metal band Emperor, who had served a prison sentence himself in Norway for an almost identical crime that was committed in Norway a few years prior. These rumours would not eventuate into anything concrete, but during the reformation shows a live DVD and album were recorded. The official and consistent lineup of Dissection through this tour and subsequent album would be John Nodvite on guitar and vocals, Seth Tatian on guitars, and Thomas Askeland on drums. And guest appearances on the album would be by Bryce Leserk on bass, and additional vocals on Mahakali by NYX218, and additioning vocals by Eric Danielson of Watain, and Whiplasher Bernadotte of Death Stars. Rain Chaos was released on the 30th of April 2006, and it has 11 tracks that clock in a total runtime of 43 minutes and 6 seconds. The tracks on this album are Nexian 218, Beyond the Horizon, Starless Aeon, Black Dragon, Dark Mother Divine, Kepharai Set, Chaos Sophia, God of Forbidden Light, Rain Chaos, Internal Fire, and Mahakali. It was released on the band's own label Black Horizon Music through Europe and was released by The End Records in North America. Beyond the Horizon. This new iteration of Dissection is a totally different animal from the one a decade prior. The only remaining elements that remind you you're still listening to the same band is the melodic hooks and John's raspily barked vocals. Gone are the blast beats, the black metal, the atmospherically dark passages of their pioneering sound, and they've been replaced with a more stripped-back Gothenburg metal sound, the likes of In Flames, Soilwork, and bands of that ilk. The tempos tend to plod along here without much deviation, and it's only when we look at the lyrics we really get to understand what this album actually is. And it's a vehicle for a message, and what that message is the teachings and invocations of Liber Azarat, the Luciferian grimoire at the centre of the MLO, now renamed the Temple of Black Light. These aren't your garden variety satanic musings about devils, Christ bashing, and fallen angels. These are meant to be invocations towards the 11 chaos deities that they believe, when resurrected or invoked, shall bring the end to the physical universe. They dub their music now the anti-cosmic metal of death, and at the time of this record it didn't receive favourable reception or reviews. But the concept aside, it's easily to see why this didn't take off as well as some would have hoped. 15 years later you see that the audiences are a bit more favourable now, but this wasn't the Dissection that people were akin to back then, and now it has its own audience, but you just feel that it can't live up to the legacy of the original two records. Kepher, I Set. This is probably the fastest song on the record. Also the shortest, aside from an instrumental track here and there that's sprinkled in, but that speed really does a little more initially than make it stand out on that sole fact alone. It's fast and it has aggression to it, but as far as composition early on, it's fairly bland. Forward, forge ahead riffing, really on repeat. Where I heaped praise over the songwriting and evolving passages of the first minute of the Grief Prophecy and Shadows Over a Lost Kingdom, here we just get a chugged intro and a repeating riff until we hit the chorus at about around a minute and a half also. And just like that, half the song's pretty much gone. But once we get to that chorus, luckily, it is a very catchy chorus, and the solo of this song really does kick ass. The last half of this song gets most things right, but it's after a build-up like that too, you kind of feel shortchanged that they don't rock out the last minute of this song a bit more, because that's where this song really has its life, and it builds well. And history of this band with a build like this would lead you to believe, that it was going to change into some giant, brilliantly crafted midsection interlaced with melody and atmosphere and dark, catchy riffs, but sadly that's not here. I mean, the only thing I can really say about it is that at least it did leave me wanting more from this, but that's a for better or worse kind of argument. Mahakali. This was the first single of the album that was released before the actual release of the album. And it was also played during their live rebirth of Dissection shows, as I mentioned before, that was released as a DVD and CD. And the songs on this record are all competent and well played, recorded very well, and they don't feel like there was any effort lacking in their creation. But once again, you're either going to love it for what it is, or it's just not going to be your thing. And this one here is also another example of that. I mean, this song is as close to a love ballad as Dissection can get, and the lyrics here are written to the Hindu goddess of destruction. They have lyrics in there like, I burn myself for thee, Kali. I cut my own throat in obscene ecstasy. I make love to abominations, embrace pain and misery, until my heart becomes the burning ground and Kali comes to me. I mean, we're pretty far from Bon Jovi's Bed of Roses, But this is a Dissection-ified style love and devotion song towards Kali. This song is just as capably written as the rest of them as well, and the female chanting and invocation here is a pretty cool element that makes it stand out, but these songs are all relatively on par and very consistent, so if this is your thing, after the first few songs, you're going to be pretty impressed and want to keep hearing, but if not, it's going to have the exact opposite effect, which left a lot of people disappointed. John would disband Dissection for the last time just 2 months after the release of this record, stating that he had reached the limitations of music as a tool for expressing what he wanted to express. A further 2 months after ending the band that he created 2 decades prior, or nearly 2 decades prior, he would end up taking his own life as well in ritual suicide in his apartment with an open copy of Liber Azarat and a self-inflicted gunshot wound in a circle of candles. This is where we'll leave the history of Dissection. I don't really have any insights, and I think most people have formed their opinion about the final days of the band and its leader. I just think that this is one of those cases where you kind of have to separate the art from the artist and try and make some peace with that in order to enjoy the music. Even if you don't necessarily agree with the man's life, you certainly couldn't agree with some of the actions that he did, but the music itself and the other members of the band and their contributions too also have to be taken into account. This was pioneering stuff and still holds up. The test of time has been really kind to this. But yeah, once again, a truly, truly disappointing end to what could have been a potentially phenomenal band had history taken a different path, as well as the main songwriter and leader of the band as well. So change of tone, what I'm going to do here is review Oxygen Destroyer's new release, the Sinister Monstrosities Spawned by the Unfathomable Ignorance of Mankind. Still a mouthful. What a title. This was released on August 27th this year, 2021, on Redefining Darkness Records. Oxygen Destroyer are from Seattle, Washington in the United States. The lineup is Chris Craven on drums, Joey Walker on guitars, Jordan Farrow on guitars and vocals, and Paul Wright on bass. Instantly, what comes to mind when you listen to the guitar playing on this album is the similarities to Polish metal legends Vader. And when you're in the conversation with a band like Vader, you're in good company, and good God, do these guys unleash on this record. There isn't a dull moment on this record, and rarely do these songs gear down, aside from a few samples in between songs. But speaking about these samples, that's what leads me to the themes of this record, which ultimately brought me to, well, these guys and brought them to my attention. Their band is named after the weapon that's used to kill Godzilla in the 1954 cinematic debut of Godzilla. And in turn, the songs are about Japanese giant monster movies and early creature features from the Ray Harryhausen era, both of which I have a real soft spot for. But there is nothing soft at all with these songs, man. And these wordy, wieldy song titles and album titles. God, look at some of these. You got Possessing the Putrefied Remains of the Unholy God Incarnate, and another one here, we got Enduring the Eternal Rage of the Amorphous Monstrosity. I almost have the need to come up for air trying to speak through those titles, but the rapid fire of the lyrical delivery on this one too is impressive as all hell. I don't know how the singer of this isn't just going pale and dropping mid-song, because that is completely beyond me. He has a vocal delivery of a machine gun on full automatic. The individual performances on this record are top-notch too, like the guitar shred, the bass is doing its own marathon assault on the bottom end, and the drumming on this is phenomenal. This is well worth a listen and definitely worth a purchase. I've got a copy, and I think if you're after one, get onto them before they sell out. I think the vinyls are all gone. There might be some CDs. But if we're going for my favourite tracks on this, I would go with Possessing the Putrefied Remnants of the Unholy God Incarnate and the Son of the Necro Beast, because that riff drum combo at the end around the 3-minute mark of Necro Beast, oh, what a monster. That is so good. And what I'm going to do next week is I'm also going to look into another themed band, because stuff it, when you find ones that are good and not just resting on those novelties, you got to give them props. I'm going to be listening to the self-titled release by the ghost-busting two-piece from America called Supernatural Elimination. And I'm also going to try and create a playlist on Spotify just for people that have told me that there's, not enough in those samples that I play between my breakdowns of songs to really give them a feel or an idea of what I'm trying to discuss. But unfortunately, I can't do too much during the episode, just simply because of the fact that with copyright law and trying to get around fair use so I don't get flagged or taken down. But if you want to go onto Spotify, look up Until the Last Gasp Extreme Metal Playlist, and you'll be able to hear those songs in full. Next week, I'm going to be looking into my own backyard. That's right, we're looking into Australian metal legends Mortification on what will be the 30th anniversary of their debut album, self-titled debut album, of course. And we're going to be looking into the classic period of them for their first 3 records that were released on Nuclear Blast in the early 90s, and which were really pioneering records within the Australian death metal scene. But until then, stay safe, play it loud, and support metal until the last gasp.